everybody that was in the same kind of situation in life as you, and you worshiped together, and you went to school together, and if you had a problem, everybody could relate. So a support group. Does everybody understand what I mean by support group? Is really the best way to describe it. And the women were the same way, and that's these ribbons under our halbas. This is called a halba. This tells you automatically what choir the woman is in. The young girls would have a bright red ribbon. Older girls would have a burgundy ribbon. And then when you turn about 18, you get your single sister ribbon, which is pink. And when you got married, you get a blue ribbon. And if something were to happen to your husband, you become a widow, you wear a white ribbon. You could get remarried in Salem. There were people married 5 and 6 times in Salem. It was in those days, you were better off to be married. To have your own house if you were married. If you weren't married in Salem, you either lived in your single brother's house or the single sister's house. No single people lived alone. Ministers had to be married. So sometimes there were certain people in the community that were asked to become a minister's wife, and it was kind of a privilege. Anna Catalina married 4 ministers. She outlived them and died a widow. So it wasn't uncommon. And there weren't very many people. At Salem at its peak, there were probably only about 200 people here. I don't know what the men-women ratio was, but everybody pretty much tried to stay married. So you can support yourself. Let's walk through the village here. To do any of this. Now this is all hand done. They had very few horses. It was mostly back-breaking work that these guys did to build this place. And that pit barn was really something. And anyway, anything they had to make out of lumber, furniture, all their stuff that they needed in their houses, they had to saw every single board like that. We'll go out in the back and I'll show you this, where he cured it, and because later on the refectory was built, the manufacturing, excuse me, in the back, and this house was more household. But at first, this was his shop. Strangers would come in off the street to make his purchases. He had his family in here. This was kind of a busy place, especially when it was 2 rooms. But as things got better, just like today, as we get more money, we'll add on a garage and maybe a deck. You know, they did like that too. You want to stay with me, okay? Bark on it. What does it say on the stake here?
Crepe myrtle.
Firelight. That was your choice. There were women that did that too. But the majority of the people did marry. The single brothers' house was very prosperous. They made a lot of money here. These guys were industrious, and they supported themselves. They ate good. They lived good here. So it was a nice place to live. But no women were ever allowed here. Morning, brother. No women could ever come in here. This was for the men only. Kind of like Well, I think they let women in for fraternity houses now, but it was kind of like a fraternity house, except no girls could ever come. When the brothers first came here, they weren't baking bread and selling it, and the single sisters were coming over here to buy it, but they hired a married baker and got him up the street and got food real quick. What's that? And some Christmas services. For all the men and boys who have their meals. The way they ate is they had breakfast in the morning, like we have. They had lunch, but lunch was their main meal of the day. Lunch was a big meal. Breakfast was kind of small. Lunch was big, and for supper, you'd have leftovers from what you didn't eat at lunch. And then around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we had what they called a vesper, which today we know is either a snack or a coffee break. They loved coffee. Coffee was the beverage of it. It was kind of strong coffee with sweet bread and sugar cake and buns.
Did it taste like coffee today?
Stronger. They ground their own coffee beans. And then the next room we're going into is the kitchen. You'll see the coffee beans grounded in there. Yeah.
How many people stay here?
Up to 60 at one time. All the work here was done by men. The cooking, all of that was done by men. Like I said, there was no women in here. It was all up to the men. And everybody had their task here to do. You had to chip in with the housework, just like you might have to do at home. Plus you had to do your work in the craft shops. Plus you had to do your, fulfill your obligations to the church. Because this was a congregation town here. So your first obligation was to God. And the rest of the time, you did all this other
What
work.
happens if you do something wrong and get scarred or something like that?
Well, there was no Kernersville. Outside of Salem was wilderness. So very few people wanted to get kicked out of town. And a couple of times, people that were asked to leave the congregation came back and were allowed to come back because they see the light real quick. When you get out there and there's Indians, bears, and all those things, that today we don't think much of because we just see it in the cowboy movies. But back then it was a real threat.
What kind of, what were they, Baptist or?
Moravian was their religion. And it was kind of like being a Methodist. Kind of like being what we know as a Methodist today. It's a Protestant religion. But Moravian is their actual religion. And there's still the Moravian church today.
What age were the boys when they started hunting?
Hunting, that could be any age. That would depend on your father. And not a lot of hunting went on. They farmed their animals. So a few of them hunted for sport, but they didn't depend on that to get their meat, not like some of the other colonists and the Indians and stuff did. These people were smart, and they had a big farm, they had cattle and stuff, and that's the way they supplied their food. But some of them did hunt for sport, for pleasure. And in a minute we'll go into the gunsmith shop and you'll see some of the firearms that they had to hunt with. And you'll see why maybe they decided to farm instead of hunt, because their firearms were nothing, to brag about. Family in here helping the master cook. This is a working kitchen still to this day. All the stuff that you see here was here then, used by the very men that we talked about. Something else that I want to mention while we're here is the Afro-Americans in Salem. This was all happening in the days when slavery was prominent. And we all studied about slavery, so we know how bad the slaves had it on the plantations and things. But in Salem, it wasn't so bad. Now, they weren't free by any means, but the Moravians did not believe in owning slaves, so they rented slaves from their owners and kept them here in Salem, and they educated them. They lived here in the brother's house amongst the white people. They were buried in the cemeteries. They went to church together. So even though they weren't quite free, they were more or less kind of equal. And it was a desire, if you were black in those days, it was a desired place to be. Just for, if nothing else, because you learned to read and write. The women also learn to read and write here, and back then that was uncommon too. They didn't figure women didn't need to be educated because all they needed to be able to do was cook, sew, and have babies. But that wasn't the case in Salem. So it was a little different here for people. We know of a man, Peter Oliver, and we're researching the Afro-Americans' role in Salem pretty heavily now. They're excavating the oldest black church in the South, which is down in the south end of town here right now. They've located the graveyard and the foundation of the log church and the new church that's been built on top. So the next time you come to Salem, it should be pretty interesting. They should be able to tell you a lot about the Afro-American local. These people spoke German, and the slaves could speak English, so it was actually helpful to have them here to communicate with the outsiders. They played a big role in helping Salem. Yes. Also, looks. You'll see it goes stripes, plaid, a broader plaid, and back to some denser stripes. And that's so they can cut different articles of clothing from the same bolts of cloth.
Does that have to go in between every thread?
Yeah. See, she steps on a pedal, and this right here splits the threads, and then she shoves the shuttle through and then packs it. And then she steps on the other pedal, and that separates another group of threads, and she shoves it back through and packs it. And that's all she does all day is separate the different threads and pack it.
I thought she had to go.
No, she just has to make one pass across. And that's what those pedals do. One time it pedals, it separates these threads, and the next time it separates them like this, and that's what makes the over and under.
She does it real fast, don't she?
Well, she can. But see, visitors are coming in and talking to her, and she'll stop while she's doing that. So, but back in the days when the weaver was working here, he would have been working consistently and done quite a bit. Now the apprentice is weaving over here, and the apprentice is weaving just plain cloth because he's learning. And this is much more complicated. You can see here that there's only, until you get good at it, this is very hard. This girl that does this has been weaving for 12 years. She's a master weaver. This person that's weaving over here has only been weaving for a year. Plus you have to stop and fix mistakes. See the little mistake here? So that will take some time to fix that because you can't leave that like that. You have to hand fix that in the needle and thread. So it's so that's a pretty neat little shirt, man.
Yeah, that will look kind of funny.
Yeah. That's a deer, and that's probably a towel. They'll all be sawing up deer. No, I think that's just part of his shop. You know, he uses it to clean up his shaving. to. Most of the time, it made things worse. They did not understand this. And a lot of people, George Washington, okay, there's a famous person. Does anybody know how George Washington died? He had strep throat, but he died from blood loss because the doctor bled him. But really all that was wrong with him was he had strep throat. And it was starting to turn into viral pneumonia because he was losing blood, he couldn't fight the infection. So, and that happened more often than not. And they did that to animals too, not just people. They did it to everything. If you had headaches and they couldn't find any reason and they couldn't find any cure, they bled you. They did this for everything.
This is where they operate.
The doctor also was the barber and shave. This is where you come to get a shave and a haircut too on Saturday before church.
Most of this is from
Yeah. This was his desk. This is where the customer would come. It's like when you go to the drugstore and talk to the pharmacist. This is we saw that outside. The joiner was making all the beds for him. I don't know why. I guess it was just the style of the day to sleep like that.
So it's original. Brown dye for linen, cotton, wool, all of that. Today we are going to be dyeing some linen thread. And we have been soaking water for 1 of our tons. Would get power getting to you? Oh, I thought you may come up to see us. It's got some really good here.
I didn't know you were doing this till I got here this morning, where I would have put that in my plan.
Village Network. Anybody want to give it a try? Huh? Come on, I'll hold it, and you just do this thing up and down.
James, Scott, back up.
You're not done yet. Okay, do it again.
Brandon.
You think we're done? Okay, do it again. Okay, we'll do it again. Okay, you see why I wanted to help?